Radiants and future world hoppers, this is the Shard of Opportunity, a CosmereRPG web series, and in preparation of the game's release, as well as our own separate campaigns, the Canonwalkers and the Loose Canons, we thought it would be nice to sit down and talk with somebody who knows maybe a bit more about the CosmereRPG than we do. My name is ReaderWarrior, and I'm going to be playing one of the characters in one of the campaigns, but I'm also joined by Scott, Game Master, Storm Daddy of the Canonwalkers, as well as CJ, Master of the Die and GM for the Loose Canons. And now joining us is the CEO of Brotherwise, one of the people responsible for the game that is going to literally make new friends and tear old ones apart, is Johnny O'Neill.
Hi, guys.
All right. And today, Johnny, just want to start off with a little question about, as you were working on this within Brandon Sanderson's canon, how do you balance those decisions about a cool idea that maybe is more powerful than it would work in a Brandon Sanderson book, or maybe something that is within the canon less powerful than it feels like the mechanics are leading you towards? How do y'all handle that kind of decision?
Cool. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's good to see you and good to talk about this RPG. So very excited to be sharing that with folks at the end of July on the digital side. And it looks like everything's on track for the September fulfillment. So I just got actually, some news on shipping dates this morning that look really good.
Ooh, sweet.
Yeah. So in terms of designing this, I wonder if this is in response to recent discussions on Mistborn playtesting, but you couldn't tell me that because that would be under NDA. We are, I think, constantly grappling with the issue of how to make sure that things feel meaningful in game, but also are true to canon, and and sort of like, as you mentioned, kind of the reverse of that problem. I'll give you a Mistborn example right now that we've been looking at gold allomancy and going so far as to be like, could this basically be like soul stamping yourself? And what we heard from Brandon was he kind of wants to keep those things distinct. That's sort of like, theoretically, we're not wrong about how the Cosmere magic works. Like, if you see something in a particular system, you can generally extrapolate that to other systems. But that was like a little bit of a sort of a step too far. And so we sort of dialed back the mechanical impact of gold allomancy to really just being kind of like more of a kind of narrative effect of like, I've become more focused or centered or determined based on seeing this different path I could have taken. So that was a deep lore dive for the viewers, but hopefully that made sense to some of the people watching this. To use a slightly less obscure example, the Surge of Tension, which is the one of the two surges that Stone Wards have access to. It's one that we really haven't seen in the books, other than a tantalizing little tidbit in Book 5, where Dammy the Stormwall has like ribbons, basically, that he brings into battle and incorporates some way that happens off screen. And so when working on that, not only do we get a lot of info, kind of new info from Brandon on how that surge works, but we then had to sort of ride that line of, okay, so like, it sounds like if you really mastered this surge, it could work a lot like Awakening on Alphys. But that was kind of like, okay, maybe technically at very high levels, yes. And so there's sort of like a end of the tree talent that's in the book that represents that, but it's one that we're unlikely to see a character in the books actually do in Roshar. That's my guess, at least. I have few insights into what happens in the back half of the series. So that's kind of an example of something that's cool about our system is because things are sort of broken down into talents and things are based on skills. We're able to kind of say like, okay, say you do want to be a gold allomancer, or you want to be a brass ferrochemist, abilities that don't necessarily seem super strong and maybe aren't super strong, kind of like cap out at something not that cool. Well, you still, like, all you need to do is get a talent or two into that, and it becomes a flavorful part of your character. We try to make sure that if you're spending a talent on it, you're getting a talent's worth of utility out of it. And then you just pile on heroic path talents or some other kind of investiture, and we're able to balance things out that way.
Yeah, the talent system is really helpful to a lot of the players that I introduced to the system, that instead of leveling up and having to do a billion different things, it's really focusing in on what is the new thing, what's the new talent that I'm bringing to that. When you think about shard blades, right? Star Wars has this problem with lightsabers.
Yeah.
People come in and think, well, I can just use a shard blade and kill you instantly.
Yeah.
How do you wrestle with some of those mechanical decisions in terms of how to balance this super weapon with players need to be able to not be able to just kill anything instantaneously?
Yeah. With shard blades, we immediately kind of, at the very earliest stages of thinking about this project, it occurred to us that, Radiance and lightsabers Radiance and shard blades are a lot like Jedi and lightsabers in terms of kind of like what a Radiant can do in terms of the power set has kind of boundaries that are similar to like how much a Jedi can do. And lightsabers, of course, are very similar. Now, in most RPGs, taking damage represents a combination of actual like wounds and scrapes and bruises and sort of near misses and losing stamina and things like that. So earlier versions of the Star Wars RPG actually had like the D20 based version initially had separate vitality points and wound points, which I always liked that system because it helped sort of identify like when you're crossing that threshold. Within the CosmereRPG, as within sort of more recent Star Wars RPGs, the language is that this is more of a stamina pool. This is your ability to avoid near misses. If you get hit with a shard blade, you're not literally hit with a shard blade until it takes you below 0. Same thing with Nightblood. We have the rules for Nightblood in Advanced Adversaries, and of course, Nightblood kills what it touches. But until you're down to until you're down to 0 or close enough for the damage to put you over the edge, you actually haven't been touched. You're sweating it. You're barely dodging it, but that is what it is. Whereas in D&D, because that's sort of like a fantasy superhero game, you can just sort of pretend that you're stabbed with a dagger, you're hit with a sword, you're hit with a mace, and that like all of those things are happening and you're still somehow surviving it. We're a little bit more grounded in reality, so that the fact is a gun can kill you, a shard blade can kill you, a dagger can kill you, but it's a lot scarier to fight against a great sword, a shard blade, a minigun. Those things are going to deal more damage, not just because they have a greater shot of like putting you over the edge into, below 0 health, but also because like they get you there faster.
And I really liked the weapon traits. And Reader, you'll have the next question, but just to finish this idea, shard blades having that deadly trait to where you can spend an opportunity to do an injury, even though you haven't reached all the way down to 0. I thought that was a really cool way that y'all brought a balance in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is another way where it's like, if you want to, you want to replicate, of course, that like you can hit somebody's limb and that limb goes dead, and obviously the person's not dead yet. So the injury system helps get us there. And in general, what we've wanted with Cosmere combat is for it to feel sort of intense and deadly and not become a slog. So in terms of like our health totals and things like that, and we think this is very true to the books, like generally, battles are fairly like quick and intense. Like if you think about how long it actually takes Zeth to do his original Assassin in White scene and, make his way through the guards and, track down, dispense with Sadius and track down Gavilar. Like that's a relatively short amount of time. So our combats are designed to transpire within about 3 rounds. We don't want them to overstay their welcome. We want them to feel dramatic, even though this word is usually used with a negative connotation, like a bit swinging, and sort of like, a nicer connotation of that is to say like dramatic or impactful. And part of that, the injury system also helps avoid characters dying really easily because we don't have a lot of ways to bring people back in the Cosmere. And therefore, kind of like when you go to 0 health, you're out of the fight, you're injured, but you're probably not dead. Though if you're fighting a shard blade, you're likely to be.
You might be.
Yeah.
Awesome. Reader, where do you want to take us next?
Okay, so you kind of touched on this in question 1A, I think it was, but about how Brandon gave you information about how certain magics work. I was wondering how much input does Dragonsteel or Brandon provide versus stuff you guys read in the books and want to incorporate, especially considering this is a game based around a series versus I'm imagining Dungeons and Dragons or Call of Cthulhu. They can basically, we just want to do it this way, and you guys are limited to.
No, definitely. Working to adapt an existing property takes a whole separate set of processes. That's true on the art direction side. It's true on the lore world guide writing side, and it's definitely true on the mechanical side. We kicked off this project with meetings with Brandon where he talked about what he wanted to see and set some of the rules for the world, kind of establish some of the boundaries. And he's enough of a TTRPG player to be able to sometimes put it in those terms. But even when he did, he sort of said, here's what you can, we're never going to give you magic that's time travel. Like that, there are certain things that where he kind of set limits and, even things like, you're not going to there's not going to be a lot of resurrection, within this magic system. So some things kind of that we could expect to not be the case. Some things that we could expect they're sort of common across some of the systems. So those are very cool conversations that remain pretty confidential, but helped guide us from the beginning and helped give us enough of a foundation as we move forward to then proactively propose things that we think he's going to like. And sometimes we push the limits a little bit more and he has to push back. But the usual process is basically we try to kind of design stuff and then we collect our questions to say, okay, here are some things that we want to do. And here are some places where we think we might be pushing it, or we just don't know, and we want you to tell us. And then he'll work with Karen Ahlstrom on his team, his continuity editor, to come back to us with that information. And then we'll then actually write it down and codify it, send it over. They'll comment on that. Then we'll propose the final text, send it over, and they'll comment on that. So some of these things happen in live meetings with Brandon, but a lot of them happen in that sort of more offline format where Karen is sitting with him and the manuscript and saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about that?
Awesome. Because I was wondering if there was something like Brandon really wanted to do it this way, but then in the book there was, we've actually only shown it this way. If there was maybe something from the book that you enhanced with the game, or the opposite of enhanced in the nice way.
Yeah.
Minimized, perhaps, or...
I mean, so there were things where there was a little bit of a push and pull. And a good example of that might be the surge of transportation. So that is a case where there are a lot of things that we wanted to do from a gameplay perspective, but I think from a story perspective, you do too much with the surge of transportation and you start creating a lot of problems for the story, as to why people aren't teleporting around willy-nilly. And without going into kind of confidential details, you will not see any Elsecaller NPCs in our canonical adventures that are taking place during, the time frame of books 1 through 5, other than Yasna. And that was a hard limit. The teleportation powers within transportation, he looked at really closely, and in general was saying, no, you got to sort of push that effect further back in the tree. And so that was an interesting case, I think, in terms of really seeing okay, we'd love to do it in the game for such and such a reason, but he's not willing to kind of sacrifice what happens in the books in order to give us good rules for the game. And he doesn't want the rules of the game to contradict what happens in the books. And so we've just done our best to kind of maneuver around that whenever that kind of thing comes up.
Awesome. Scott, your turn.
Cool. We've been talking a lot about radiance and cool powers and stuff. And, everyone loves a radiant. We follow so many of them in the books. But can you talk about the design process around the heroic paths, kind of the more, everyday person or something? How do you make it so that people that aren't magical superheroes kind of still feel important and impactful.
Yeah.
In both role play and combat.
I love the heroic paths, and they were something that I would say I kind of proposed very early on in the design vision for this, that we need to make sure that the non-invested characters are meaningful and powerful, and that their capabilities are very flexible in order to make all of this work. Because say you've got somebody like Awakening is cool, but in my opinion, generally speaking, it's not as cool as a lot of what the Radiants could do. So if you want two people kind of in those two different magic systems to be able to stand side by side and still be, equals, the heroic paths are how you offset that. Same thing with like a Mistborn and a Misting in a party. You don't want the situation where it's like, well, this person is just cooler than everybody else. And to some extent, yes, a Mistborn will always be more versatile than any individual Misting. And a Radiant who can fly is going to inherently be able to do things that a really good like leader or really smart scholar just is not going to be able to do. But I think within those kind of like logical constraints, we've made the heroic paths really powerful, really meaningful, really fun to play. And you could have a whole RPG where you were just playing with the heroic paths and be perfectly happy with it. Each one has a lot of depth. So if I pull up one of our talent trees, like the agent tree here, you can see like there each one of these trees has these what we call specialties, has 8 talents within it. So that's not quite 20 levels of character, because there's some levels where you can get more than one talent. But basically, you could play an agent your whole career if you wanted to. Of course, that's not what we see in the books, generally speaking. We see characters like Paladin, who definitely has levels in the surgeon specialty of scholar, definitely has levels in leader, definitely has levels in soldier, might even have levels in hunter, alongside all of his all his Windrunner levels.
And kind of building off that, or along with that, like in the game, like how many paths like do you think that optimally a player would be able to actually get talents in? Like we love having those capstone talents and getting the real powerful stuff at the end. You like is 2 a good number? Is 5 a good number?
All of them.
I think 3. I think 3 is a really good number. That's one that I'd throw out there. 2 is perfectly valid. 4 is perfectly valid. 5 starts to feel like a lot unless it's a really high level character. I will say we tried to make the capstone talents meaningful, but not kind of like must-haves. Like it's not the idea that like, if you don't go to the capstone, you're sort of wasting your time here. We really tried to make it so that, with few exceptions, every time you move up a talent, you're getting like a meaningful impact from that, and then could kind of like go off and go do other stuff if you wanted to. There are some exceptions, like being, like just getting to the second ideal isn't that exciting, compared to just moving on to the third ideal. There might be a couple of talents here and there where we needed a very powerful effect, and maybe sort of a less awesome effect is in between them. But even those, we tried to make sure like we're solid. So yeah, that's it. But I think we've seen a lot of positive feedback on the way that heroic paths are structured, and they're a lot of fun to play around with.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we've enjoyed and we've had a good time with it. CJ, over to you.
Yeah, when you're thinking about those the levels, some of them have, like first ideal, for example, give a character goals. Can you talk about the goal system and how that kind of creates, for me, as I've read through it and have gotten to play some and lead some at Gen Con and different places, that's kind of one of the biggest differences I've seen between this RPG and others. Could you talk about the goal system?
Yeah, so within the system, we have 3 kind of like key narrative components on every character sheet. So you have a purpose, you have an obstacle, and you have goals. And so your purpose is the like really like underlying thing driving you as a person. So for somebody like Kaladin, it is pretty much protecting people. So for a lot of the Radiants, it is whatever their Radiant ideal is, or some kind of like personalized variation of it. For, I don't know, somebody like Raoden from Elantris, his purpose is probably helping other people find their purpose, and so it can be very individualized. Your obstacle is supposed to be the thing that kind of like stands in your way. Then goals are individual things that you're trying to progress. They could be like missions that you're on or things about yourself that you're trying to improve. And you're trying to check up, they each come with 3 little check boxes, and you're trying to check off a goals box every time that you're in a session, ideally. And that is how you progress through Radiant Ideals, because we really didn't want those to just be mechanical. We wanted people to feel like, okay, hey GM, in this session, do you remember all the times I tried to protect people? Or do you remember the times I sort of remembered the forgotten, or sort of showed my commitment to like self-mastery and self-control? And so that gets, I think it's a really meaningful role-playing hook. And it also provides a little bit of like a kind of mechanical connection to these really powerful effects, because goals unlock rewards, and rewards are kind of like magic items in D&D, in that they're things that are kind of outside your core class or path progression, but make you cooler or more powerful or give you capabilities that you wouldn't otherwise have. And so a reward can be, your sprint bond and your ability to do cool Radiant stuff. But it could also be, a dead shard blade. It could be, becoming a high prince. It could be having a really powerful patron, or bonding a Rashadium, or, having a really cool pet, or like a bodyguard. So all of those things are rewards. And again, it gives us a way to kind of balance out somebody like Adolin, who isn't having to spend his rewards on Radiant stuff. So he's getting other things.
Reader, by the end of our campaign, you'll be a high prince. Don't worry, we'll get that for you.
Well, I was gonna say, we've got a Horn Eater right now that is she's got 1 box checked for gain a white spine as a companion. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, you can pretty much, if there's a creature, you can bond to them as a companion.
Okay, so you've talked about how you guys are secretly kind of working on the Mistborn editions already, and you've made comments about Nulthins and Breath and Awakening. Is there any difficulty to trying to plan for those editions, especially considering you would want, the max level of Radiant to be capable of fighting against on a semi-equal level as somebody who's a Mistborn or an Awakener or an Elantrian, and not just immediately powerhousing them?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that we've tried to build into our planning from the very beginning. We've had kind of like sketched out versions of what Awakening looks like or what Aondor looks like. Those have been the big ones that we've planned ahead for. I can't say, for example, that we have like pinned down the mechanics for like the different spores in Trust of the Emerald Sea, but it's like we generally know now where we'd go there. And Aondor is probably the toughest one, and is one of the reasons why we have the action system that we have. So one of the ways it will be balanced is by the amount of time it actually takes to draw these symbols in the air, that while you're doing that, somebody could come up and whack you. Now if they've already like rewritten the rules of the universe to suit themselves in a particular scene, that gets harder, but we can cover a lot of that with how we've built the talent system and the leveling system. So, all tricky stuff. I think probably the biggest challenge we've run into is like a full Ferricomist is a lot to trek. That's just like it's a ton of stuff. I mean, in general, like Mistborn is a lot of mechanics to parse from a game design perspective. And you've got 16 metals times Allomancy and Ferrochemy. So that's like 32 systems. There's 1 or 2 that Brandon basically said, don't like leave that one blank. Kind of like we did with Bondsmiths. Like he doesn't want to reveal all those powers yet. So stuff around kind of like identity and things like that. That's like Ghostbloods 3 or beyond. Mistborn 3 or beyond. So we don't want to dig into that. But in general, we've got, like 30 different magic systems to deal with in magic sort of powers within a couple of different magic systems in Mistborn. And that's a lot to tackle. And because a fair chemist can have so many of them, that is also just, it's opting into a lot of complexity if you as a player want to play a full Farrakhamist. You can do it. It's fun, but it's a little bit like opting into like a really complicated wizard that has a ton of spells and things like that.
Can I ask real quick, is there, due to the fact the Roshar handbook was 5 surges for the most part for everybody, as well as all the different paths, are we, and I realize this might get raffoed.
Jaffo, as it were?
Yeah. Would the Skadra one, would that just be Allomancy / Mistborns, and then later would be a Feruchemist, or are we going to get sort of all, because you were saying how large of a list that would be?
So I mean, within Stormlight, the Stormlight handbook has all 10 surges, across 9, across nine paths. Because there is a point when we first started this project where we actually thought we might only get to do like 5 of the Radiant Orders, and that like Brandon would want to hold back essentially anything that hasn't appeared on the page. We had one meeting where that was kind of his direction, and then he later changed his mind, which we're very glad for.
Thank you, Brandon.
With Mistborn, we knew we would be able to tackle, like in general, almost everything. And so like there's a little bit of mystery around like tapping and storing identity, as I mentioned. But as an example, we have Chromium Feruchemy, which is tapping and storing fortune, which was has been sort of misunderstood as tapping and storing luck in the past, and is not. And so we got kind of like the official Brandon answer on that, which when Crafty Games was working on the Mistborn adventure game, they didn't have. So they at that time sort of took the strategy of substituting something that worked for gameplay. And one of our goals for this project is actually to not do that. That like if there's a hole, that we sort of leave it mysterious. And luckily, all the things that like PCs would most likely have access to are all available. So it's a lot of powers, and it is more like 16 times 2 is more than 10, and so it's given us a little bit more to sink our teeth into. But luckily, the system's robust enough to accommodate all that.
Just to clarify, so we have 10 surge paths in Stormlight. Yeah. You're saying that we're going to have 30 plus paths in the Mistborn handbook?
Yes, though some of those paths will be very short. This is all subject to change because it's still in some final playtesting. But for example, Aluminum, I think either has 0 talents or 1 talent. But for Aluminum Allomancy. There are, some of the Feruchemies, which are like tapping and storing nutrition or breath or things that are like, you just can't dig that far into, might only have a talent or 2, right? So some of those are very short. In the same way that, within the Stormlight handbook, we have paths for for singers. And so with singer forms, we have the basic forms, and each of these 3 talents gives you access to 2 of the basic forms. And then we have sort of a buffer talent, Ambitious Mind, that is your Bond Avoid Sprint talent. And then the Regal forms, which again we got 6 split into 2. It turns out it's really convenient that there's like 6 of each major ones, because that like lines up with the like attribute scores in the game. It splits nicely like this. So similarly, Kolos Blooded and Khandra have their own short talent trees to unlock kind of like additional capabilities. So like, as Kandra, you can eat people's bodies and take on their shape like out of the box, but doing some of the like fancier Kandra stuff will take a talent. Like doing it quickly, or doing it, doing things like I feel like Milan's like hiding a weapon within her body. I feel like that might be a talent, if I'm remembering correctly.
As you're looking at those kinds of things, is there anything either in the Stormlight, Mistborn, or planned in one of them that will help game masters and players have a session 0 where they say, this is the book that provides the mechanics that Brandon co-signed, and then here's a conversation about, hey, you want to be able to use transportation. Does that make sense? Like, not homebrew necessarily, but being able to figure out as game master and player where there is a hole or where there is squishiness, how do we handle that at our table? Do you have any kind of guidance in the books for that?
I would say we haven't left any holes or squishiness. At this point, this is the Cosmere RPG. This is what the Search of Transportation does. And if you wanted to do something other than that would be homebrew, like homebrew in any RPG. Maybe I would say we provide maybe a little pinhole on bondsmiths. We sort of say, well, you've got the 2 searches that they have access to, so you could build a character kind of using these and extrapolating from there. We have a section on playing like bonding multiple Sprin, which is sort of generally don't do this, but if you really want to, here are the rules. And there might be like 1 or 2 other kind of sidebars like that, but that gets into like pretty specialized content where probably, unless like the fan community ends up developing kind of like homebrew stuff that people kind of might come to your table asking for, then that's where you might want to have a session 0 for that. We always recommend a session 0, but at the moment, this isn't built with a lot of like binary choices of like, oh, you could do it this way or that way. I thought of one. Skybreakers and Dustbringers canonically have limited access to their to the Surge of Division, and because like the Sprin don't want you to have access to something so destructive, that is it takes a little harder to get than other Surges. If you want to ignore that, that's one that could be something that you bring up, but even that's probably more of like an individual discussion with your GM rather than a kind of like a list of topics for session 0.
Due to the time, I think we've only got enough for one more question. Scott, I believe that falls to you.
Yeah, okay. I wanna dive in. I'm the game master of Stonewalkers. And I wanna hear about Stonewalkers, what the whole process was like. It's a big I would Wonka vision. I would love to be transported into that. Big campaign for Stormlight. It's canonical, as much as an RPG campaign can be. It's kind of a nerd's dream to work with your to work with an author on something like this. Can you talk about like the process of going back and forth and working on this, and I don't know, maybe give us a little bit of an idea of what to look forward to for Mistborn with that, if you guys are in the middle of working on that one as well?
Sure. Yeah, this is it has been a nerd's dream. I can confidently say that as a nerd. The process has been very cool on this in that we came to Dan and Brandon with some ideas of like, hey, we'd like to do an adventure, but we'd love it to come from you. It's possible Brandon was actually the one to originally pitch that it come from him. That gets murky, but it was something early in the discussions, and he said, okay, here's what here's some things I would love to include in that adventure. And there were things in general that like he didn't get to, within the first 5 Stormlight books, but where he kind of had ideas for what was going on off screen. And he communicated that to us and to Dan, and then we worked with Dan a little bit more closely. Dan Wells, as like VP of narrative at Dragonsteel, he's responsible for a lot of non-core novel project stuff that's happening, like the Dark One audiobook, stuff like that. If they were to make video games, which I don't have any inside info, but if they were to, he would be closely involved in that. And he's closely involved in this, and he's a huge TTRPG nerd. He is like, he's worked as a pro GM. He has every system you've ever heard of and many that you haven't on his shelf. He knows more about RPGs than some of the people on our team. So we worked with him. We worked with Dan, and also Karen Ulstrom was very important for that. Brandon had this great idea about involving Nightblood, but then Karen had to inform us, that doesn't work from a timeline perspective. And that was months into the process. So we had a lot to sort of unwind from that. But the, other things like including lists, including axes, including this very cool new villain. That's all stuff that we were able to get directly from the source and put into this very cool story.
Cool. One thing about Stonewalkers is that it's level 1 through level 7, right?
That's right.
So it's kind of the start of maybe a group's adventure, and then they can go off and do more exciting things from there. Do you guys have any plans to do higher level adventures in the future, or do you kind of think that you'll mainly stick in that lower level area to give people a launch pad?
It is something we would love to do, but I don't think we're ready to announce anything yet.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
I would say all the RPG industry people I know say, adventures don't make money, so be careful about how many adventures you sign up for, because most people want to homebrew their own content. However, I am actually a big believer in adventures being helpful. Like, even as somebody who homebrews 95% of my own RPG adventures, I still have a decent number of published adventures on my shelf. There we go, that vicinity. And what I do is I use them as reference for what's an appropriate level of challenge for my PCs. Mm-hmm. What are some enemies and maps and set pieces that I can steal to put into my own campaign? And that is how we expect people to, use some of our adventures. And for that reason, I do think showing what higher level play looks like is important. It is a challenge we want to tackle, at some point, but it's probably still a little bit down the line, because the next big adventure we're working on is Mistborn Legacy. And that's another adventure that starts at level 1. And that's another thing is if people don't buy adventures in general, they really don't buy higher level adventures. Adventures that start at level 1 way outsell any that don't. And so we, that's a consideration. But as a service to the fandom, I still want to find a way to make it happen. But Mistborn Legacy is very cool. That's one where, again, we worked very closely, with Dan and Brandon to make sure that what we're doing fits the story, works well. This one, I would say, this one didn't have kind of like an untold story from Brandon that drove it in the same way, but it had some very cool ideas, and it moves back and forth between time in a way that I think is really cool and really ambitious. As I mentioned, there's no time travel in the Cosmere, but in this, you're playing 2 parties of characters, one in Era 1, one in Era 2, and swapping back and forth between chapters. And it's very cool. We were a little worried this would end up feeling too complicated, but its playtesting results are going really well. And the idea that it's you make something happen in Era 1 and then see the ripple effects in Era 2 is super neat.
Wow. That that is very exciting. Thank you. Yeah, that was the end of my question.
Cool.
Scott, can I add a 1-word question with a question mark at the end?
Oh.
Desolations? ?
Yes. That's something people have asked for a lot.
You said yes.
And
I did hear that. I heard yes.
Not ready to share any announcements there.
Okay.
Play and find out. I don't know. I don't think I'm authorized to say Raffo. I think that was Jordan, then Sanderson. Doesn't make a joke.
Yeah. Play and find out is a great answer. I love it.
That's going to do it just about for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Johnny. It has been an absolute wonder, both play testing so far as well as, getting excited for the real game. Not to mention being able to sit down with you, the person who made this, not sort of all possible. We have Brandon to thank for that, but you definitely made the game happen. So thank you very much for meeting with us.
Thanks for having me, and I can't wait to get this game into your hands.
Oh, we're very excited. If anybody watching this is excited as we are for this, I believe the release date is announced as July 23rd. On that date, we will be posting 2 episodes, one for each of our campaigns, both the Canonwalkers and the Loose Canons. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you very much for watching. Have a nice day.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.